Hey, there we are. Welcome everybody to the Second Chance Live show where we're all about taking your failures and your mistakes and making something good out of it. Like I'm excited for our guest today, Tiffany Yu, because she has a phenomenal story and she is brilliant. I heard her speak on Clubhouse a few times and I was just like, I got to get her on the show because she was just dropping bombs and it was really authentic, like how you hear people that I don't know. Like I feel like authenticity has a sound. Like you can tell when someone's not being themselves. And I could just tell you were comfortable in your zone of genius. You were comfortable who you are, and you were adding a tremendous amount of value. So I am excited to share you with our audience. I titled your episode "The Gift of Obstacles." What do you think about the title?
I like it. It's all a gift. We're all manifesting gifts all the time.
Yes. If you would have said something else, my feelings would have been crushed. I worked hard on that title. I was like stalking you on social media. I watched your TED Talk, which was phenomenal, by the way. You guys should watch it. And I just was like, this is what we're going to talk about when I bring her on, because like you can speak to this. And there's a lot of people who are facing obstacles right now and they don't see it as a gift, but you are able to take what you've been through to see it as a gift. So guys, you know how this works. I'm going to read her bio, and why I read her bio and say great things about her because she's amazing, I want you to be thinking about people you know in your network that are following you on social media, that are maybe stalking you on social media, and you just want to be nice and share this information with them. All you have to do is click that share button on whatever platform that you're watching. And if you're watching the replay, which the majority of viewers do, just make sure you can still host a watch party on Facebook and you can still click share because it's going to live up there. So just go ahead and do that. So let me introduce you to Tiffany Yu. Am I saying your name right? I should have asked you that before the show.
Yeah, no, that was perfect.
Boom. In just a matter of moments, everything changed for Tiffany when her father crashed their vehicle, giving her a disability in life without a father. Today, we're going to be talking about the gift of obstacles. Tiffany is the CEO and founder of Diversability, an award-winning social enterprise created to rebrand disability through the power of community. I love that. I love that. Like, did you write that yourself?
I did.
So I like it. She's got a ton of experience. She's been co-chair of the World Economic Forum Sustainability Development Impact Summit in 2020 and served on the leadership committee for San Francisco's Future Disability Cultural and Community Center. She's been named in 2017 as top 100 most influential Asian Americans, her and me both, in
good company.
She's amazing, and I told you about her authenticity, and I meant it. Tiffany, let us know. I want to jump right in to the story, to the accident. Walk us through what happened prior to in that moment, and how you felt in the moment.
I just transported myself. So I didn't know what to think. And so if you heard a little bit of it in the intro. If you haven't had a chance to watch my TED Talk, I was involved in a single vehicle car accident at the age of 9 during Thanksgiving weekend, the day after my dad's birthday. And so we dropped my mom off at the airport for a business trip. And on the way home, he ended up having a seizure and lost control of the car. And as many of us do, I think with traumatic things, I still remember it like it was yesterday. And I remember sitting in the car and just really confused because I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know if I should do anything. I was there with my siblings as well. And we were all, it was almost like we were all holding our breath. And the only thing I knew how to do was I literally just grabbed everything that was meant to protect me in the car. So I grabbed the grab handle with my right arm, and then I grabbed my seatbelt with my left hand. And upon impact, I ended up breaking a couple bones in my leg and stretching the nerves in the back of my neck called the brachial plexus, which would end up paralyzing one of my arms. So when I woke up, though, I was still so confused. Literally, it was just confusion because I was a 9-year-old, right? I think 9 is the age where you're just starting to really figure out what's going on in the world. And when I woke up, I was in this helicopter and I was laying down And I described this very visually in the talk. And there was just someone hovering over me. And again, I'm 9. I don't really know who this person is. And it must have been just so late at night because all I wanted to do was sleep. And he kept like doing this to my eye as I was like trying to sleep. And all I could think was, I just want to sleep right now. Why is this guy so annoying, right? But in retrospect, I'm just like, he was probably just making sure that I was staying conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes people ask me, was I in pain? Did it hurt? I don't remember, probably. To have that severe of an injury and then breaking a couple bones in the leg, that probably hurt a lot. But I think the general consensus for me at that age was shock, because I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And the only thing I remember a couple things. First, I remember Hillary Clinton came to the hospital because it was Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C. And she was the first lady at the time. And the nurse came and said, "Hey, Hillary, not vice president. I'm missing my words. First Lady Clinton is here. Do you want to go and see her?" And I was like, "No, I just want to sleep. I want to watch TV." And 9-year-olds, now in retrospect, I was like, man, I should have had my talk ready, had my talking points, shook her hand, taken the picture. But I didn't want to do anything. And I think the way I reacted is how a 9-year-old should have been reacting, right, when something like that happens, which is, what's going on? What's happening with my body? Where's my dad?
Mm-hmm.
Why did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
When can I play with my friends?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. So what was the family's reaction like? And, what were some of those conversations that you were having that initial year after the accident?
Unfortunately, no conversations. And I've been reflecting on this a lot, and I did a lot of research on this about a year ago. And I became really curious about death, disability, and car accidents or trauma in the context of being Asian.
Mm.
And what I found was that those 3 things were so highly stigmatized, so taboo, that you didn't even want to talk about them. You didn't want to even breathe air into them because it would manifest as some ill fate onto your family. And I'm the first generation daughter of an immigrant from Taiwan and a refugee from the Vietnam War. And I want to acknowledge the intergenerational trauma that they may have carried with them as we created this life in the US. So I often tell people I've only ever seen my mom cry twice.
Wow.
One was so again, we dropped her off at the airport because she was meant to travel. And again, we actually haven't talked about this, but I imagine she tried calling home a couple times to check in if we made it home okay. And I'm the youngest of 4, and 3 out of 4 of us were in the car. So my brother Adam may have picked up the phone and said, "They're not back yet. They're not back yet. They're not back yet." And so I saw my mom at the hospital. And when she saw me, she literally burst into tears. And again, as a 9-year-old, I was like, why is she sad? I'm in a bed now. I can go to sleep. It's late at night. And the other time, so after this 3 weeks in the hospital, then it was my dad's funeral, and it was also Christmas. And so his funeral was right before Christmas. And at this point, so the bones in my leg were still broken. I was in a wheelchair for about 4 months. And so I got wheeled up to my dad's coffin, and I didn't even cry, right? It wasn't normalized in my family that expression of emotion like that was appropriate. So I literally still remember getting rolled up to there, and I said, "Hi, Daddy, it's Tiffany." Literally probably in that same voice.
Wow.
But then when my mom went up there, that was the second time I ever saw her cry, I think seeing her husband in the casket. And so what I had learned and what my mom modeled for me, and I also want to acknowledge that my mom is a hero because she raised 4 kids on her own. We're all in our 30s now. We're all still alive. I think that's a success. And but what she modeled for me was here I was, a 9-year-old girl in a wheelchair, and my arm was in a sling. And the messaging that she modeled was that all I could try to do was just fix myself. And this is the narrative that I grew up with throughout my entire adolescence, was hide my disability, never talk about the car accident. We talked about my dad. When people would ask about my dad, my mom again modeled for me to tell people that he was away on a trip. Now in retrospect, and I think gaslighting is too too severe of a word, but that's kind of what it is, right? Where I know what the reality is, but I'm delivering something else that I know isn't real, because that's the messaging. So in that first year, and now 23 years later, there still hasn't been a conversation.
Wow.
And I actually think that this is part of the reason why I started Diversability, is I couldn't find healing in my family unit. So I needed to create it for myself.
Wow. Wow. I'm fascinated. I'm curious to know, talk about that. At what point did you decide, like, hey, I want to start a movement? Or did it even start with that thought? And talk us through the early years of Diversability.
Yeah, I always love, well, first of all, I love sharing origin stories. I love the way you ask the question, because it's much different than it's normally asked to me, which is, tell me about the car accident. You were like, transport me to that moment, and what was 9-year-old Tiffany thinking. Fast forward, so I spent 12 years not telling anyone about the car accident. I wore the sling on my arm. Now, when I run into people I went to middle and high school with, they're like, Tiffany, I knew about your arm, but I didn't know about the car accident, right? It was even people I went to school with every single day who didn't even know what had happened, right? I didn't give that story a voice. So fast forward 12 years of suppressing this story, not thinking that it mattered. And I became really curious about what it would look like to not be a victim anymore. Because I noticed that even, and I'm still trying to unlearn it, even in the way my posture was, I was small. I wanted to be small. I wore long sleeves all the time. I just wanted to hide, right? No, I didn't want any attention. And what ended up happening, so this is a little bit of a lighter hearted story, was my background is in finance. So I interned at Goldman Sachs in investment banking. And while I was there, no one cared how many arms it took to get the work done. So, no arms, 1 arm, 2 arms, your 8-arm octopus, like,
Right.
just deliver the pitch book at 9 a.m. And honestly, I bring that up because that was the first time I felt like I wasn't given an easy pass for life. And I know you've got some roots in the sports realm, but my physical education class was so unpleasant. And it was unpleasant because every single day I'd show up and I would hand the note that my mom wrote to my PE teacher, and I wasn't even using my voice. Whatever my mom wrote was the truth, right? And I would notice the look on my teacher's face that was one of pity. And it was just this voiceless exchange that said, here's the situation, let me sit on the sidelines, instead of being an active participant in my own life. So now when I was in investment banking, I couldn't be a passive participant there. They needed the pitch books and the Excel files done. And that, to me, I think, started to make me really curious, because every single week you could go in and talk to the recruiter to get feedback about how you're performing. And I went in one week and the recruiter said to me, and I know she was very well-meaning, but she said, Tiffany, I want you to know that you deserve your place here. You don't need to have a chip on your shoulder. And I ran out of there as quick as I could, because I just wanted to cry, because what she did was she saw me and she was calling me out. And when I came back from that internship, this is, I think, where the seeds started to get planted, which is, wow, when I worked in that environment, I wasn't a victim. They needed the pitch book, and I delivered. I got the full-time offer to go back to work in investment banking, which I ultimately ended up doing. And I was like, here I am. I'm a senior at university now. I went to Georgetown, and like, I'm starting to gain more consciousness around these different aspects of my identity. because when I worked in finance, they invited me to all these like women's roundtables. And I was super confused by it because I hadn't really developed consciousness around diversity. Like I grew up in an area that was very white suburbia, and I ended up going to a university that was also very white, right? So my anchoring was always there. And I'll acknowledge that a lot of my unlearning is trying to disentangle that. But I had never really thought about like what it meant to be Taiwanese American. What does it mean to be the daughter of immigrants? What does it mean to be a woman in a male dominated industry? And now this newest level of consciousness was, what does it mean to be disabled, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the context of my family, disability was always viewed through a medical diagnosis that needed physical therapy and treatment and surgeries and other things like that. And now I was starting to develop consciousness around, what does disability look like as identity? Because how I show up every day may be similar to you, Daryl, as a Black man. Like that influences how people treat us, and how we move about the world, and the words that we use, and how, and so those were the seeds. And I didn't know if anyone would care. And this is, I love that this is called the gift of obstacles, because what ended up happening was I had this idea to create a disability club. I didn't know who would join, but I ended up applying for a grant through my university. And when I went to the grant committee to get interviewed, and I told them about this dream. So the dream in the beginning, and it still is to create a movement around disability pride. So I went to them and they said two things to me. They said, Tiffany, how can anyone be proud to be disabled? That was number one. Again, this is 2009, and things have changed, right? And I'm so grateful that things have evolved. But then the second thing they said is, why do you think anyone is going to care? And
geez, man.
I know.
Hey, where I'm from, Tiffany, them is fighting words, man. You say that in Jackson, you get knocked out.
but again, like it was like, there were power dynamics at play, right? Which is they have access to money, and I really want this. And ultimately, as I stumbled through the interview, they gave me $500. $500 is not that much money, but for a 20-year-old girl or for a 20-year-old young woman, it was everything. But what was everything about it was that it wasn't just Tiffany believing in this idea and the fact that we needed conversation around disability. It was that the university, or whoever was on this grant committee, believed in me, and no one had ever believed in me up until that point. So the $500 was whatever it was, but that vote of confidence was really priceless.
Wow. I'm fascinated. It's such a fascinating story. I honestly, I want to camp there for a little bit, but I can't because there's so much more I want to get into in terms of, practical stuff. And I know that you've got traction on TikTok, and I'd love for you to talk about some of the tips, because that's the ultimate goal, right? It's like, how do we create that change? But before we get there, just really quickly, I still want to learn more about how did it become a movement that got attention.
I'm thinking back to the title of our episode, The Gift of Obstacles, right? And I want to make this relatable.
Keep saying it because it makes me feel good every time you reference the title. You start off, you're like, it's okay, but now it's like, see, okay. So it's my ego talking. I'm sorry.
How did it become a movement? I think about something that our new mutual friend, Andy Henriquez, has said, our new Clubhouse mutual friend. And he said, what is the bigger mission, right? So for me, oftentimes when I share that story of the car accident and what it felt like to grow up so alone, have you ever felt left out before, right? I think that's a feeling that we can all get behind. I think for Diversability, what helped us in the beginning was there were three, and I've talked about this before, there were three things that I hadn't seen any other disability organizations do yet. Again, this is back in 2009. Number one was I hadn't seen any cross-disability movements. Oftentimes, disability organizations are very fragmented by type of disability. Here are the people who have the brachial plexus injuries. That's a new one of mine. Here are the spinal cord injuries, the the Center for the Blind, the Center for the Deaf, the Center for the Deaf Blind. Everything's got their own, and that's all needed, right? Because there are levels of research that I think are happening for different types of these conditions. The second was that I wanted to include non-disabled allies in our movement. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because we spend so much time focusing on self-advocacy. Here's how you can show up and be your own best advocate. Support groups are amazing. But in order to really move things along, I need to bring people who may have never touched disability to come meet me and come hear my story, be touched by my story, become my friend and my partner and my ally for life. And then the third was, whenever I looked at a lot of these other disability organizations, they were all, and I know again, well-meaning, but they were all focused on fixing disability. It was never about celebrating disability pride or acknowledging that disability was an identity that we should take ownership over. And yeah, the narrative was always, let's do more research to eradicate this disability. Let's and I want to acknowledge, like, some disabilities are like very debilitating, and I appreciate all the research that's done. But my arm was paralyzed 23 years ago, and my arm is still paralyzed, and I don't want to go around with a narrative thinking that I need to be fixed, because that is a different type of energy to carry around. So it was really those three things, and I talked about those three things a lot, that brought people in, right? It brought people in who were passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but had never really thought about disability as part of that, right? Part of those conversations. It brought people who didn't know where they were on their disability journeys, but were really curious about what it would look like to root themselves in community. And you know, it's interesting because I look at the market. The market for disability, we're 1 billion plus people strong. Here in the US, we're 61 million. And our community is only like 30,000, you know? So it's like we're still a small dent in a very large population.
I love it. Do you think that there was because I feel like a lot of times when people are building movements, there's always this fight to prove yourself. Did you ever like feel like, hey, I'm really trying to get people to buy into this message and take this serious and start having these conversations and finance it and support it and all this stuff? Like, was there a turning point where it was like, man, like, was there a person that you met that kind of put you on a platform where they got visibility and now people took that as seriously? Like, how? Like, I'm still looking for the gasoline of the story.
I know. That is a great question. I mean, I think that questions around my own sense of self-worth and limiting beliefs are things that I'm still encountering every day. And one of my friends, Brian Pham, if he sees this, he runs an incredible community called the Asian Hustle Network. And he reached out to me and he said, Tiffany, what do you do when you feel frustrated? And I said, I remind myself that my mission is bigger than my business and my organization. And I wish I could say that it was my family who supported me, or I met this, you know, really incredible mentor along the way. I mean, I do feel like my internship at Goldman was a real turning point for me in terms of shifting how I saw disability. But and one of the things I'm learning through my coach is I acknowledge I don't give myself enough credit for the things I've done. And she's encouraging me, and I have written it down. She's encouraging me to reframe that and say, I'm the type of person who, you know, co-chairs a World Economic Forum Summit alongside the president of Colombia, the country. Because why not, right? And so I come back to the way you introduced me, which is the authenticity. And I think I veer a little bit too far on the humbleness side, but I think I just have such a firm belief that if I continue to do the work, the rewards will come. And the problem that I'm trying to solve, ableism, the problem I'm trying to solve is so enormous, right? And oftentimes I just feel so defeated. But what keeps me going is literally those, posts that come into Facebook or slide into my DMs that say, "Hey, Tiffany, I appreciate you speaking up about this. You've really changed my perspective about X, Y, and Z." And sometimes it's just that one person whose mindset was changed, you reaching out to want to have me on your show. Like it's just these little things that keep me going. So instead of the gasoline, I guess I'll say it's a slow drip.
Yeah, I get it. And part of it is this: you're so gifted, and that's one of the challenges with gifted people is what's natural to them. They think it's like, yeah, no, you just keep going about life. You do the work, and it's like, no, like people who don't have your gift don't understand how. I was gonna do a rhyme. I was gonna say, I'm not gonna do it. But sometimes since I'm a speaker, I always speak in these like little like concise statements. I was gonna say, since people don't understand your gift, they don't understand your grind. But it's like,
Mm.
what does that mean, right? It
No,
sounds
I
good.
like
It's
it.
like
I
it's
like
like a good
it.
soundbite, but then it's like, what does that mean?
That's
But
that's that's the tweetable moment. But I also do want to share. So I was born in April, late April, so I'm a Taurus. And one of the things that is known about people in my zodiac sign is that we're stubborn. And when I had this idea for Diversability, and I didn't share this part, so you did hear the part about the grant committee, but I did want to find validation. So I went to a couple people who I knew were passionate about disability, either connected to it or had lived experience, and I shared with them my idea. And what they told me was that the university wasn't ready. The university wasn't ready to talk about disability or to create spaces for that. But again, I'm stubborn, and so I still went ahead with it, right? Again, sometimes if you just have such a firm belief in what you're doing and why it needs to be out in the world, you will figure out a way to do it. And there will always, literally always, there will always be naysayers.
Mhm. You got some thick skin. You got some thick skin. You got some thick skin. Man. I gotta acknowledge that, man. Like you've took some punches, and it's fascinating to me, even listening to you describe your family's silence that could be very painful. You can't even describe it without having grace and mercy and like understanding of where they've learned this narrative from. And it's amazing to have that.
Mm.
And I just want to call that out and point that out to you. Like that is phenomenal, because I know people who have been hurt way, way less, and they can't forgive a soul, and they're held captive by their unforgiveness. But what do you think it is in you that has been able to really develop a compassionate, understanding heart when you could have played the victim?
I love that question. Therapy. Just, no, but yeah.
They
Sorry.
say there's truth in every joke. So
Yes, but for me, I think the real turning point. So I was angry for my mom for a very long time, and I didn't share this, but I have shared it in other places. So my mom was left to raise 4 kids on her own. My dad said the family didn't really like her that much. I kind of describe my mom as like an Asian Hillary Clinton. So anyway, so my dad's side of the family didn't really like her, and so they didn't really give her the support that she needed as now a widowed mother of 4 young children.
Mhm.
And we 9 to 14. And she did what she could, which is she worked. And worked so hard, which also meant, and I have shared this before. So I learned how to forge her signature for permission slips at school for field trips and stuff. I also had memorized her credit card number in case I needed to buy anything. And I never abused it. I was like the, like if I had someone's credit card, I feel like I'd want to buy a lot of, but anyway, but I did those things because she was never home, because she was working all the time.
Mhm.
Right. And so again, there was this silence in the family, but it was there because she did what she felt like she needed to do, which is I never had to worry about a roof over my head. I never had to worry about where I'd go to school or food on the table, right? The basic needs. But what
Mhm.
was missing was that emotional support.
Mhm.
And so I felt very angry and probably still harboring some resentment toward her for not being there for 9 until 18, up until I went to college.
Mhm.
But what I realized is that no one gives you a guide to be a parent. I feel like, and I give kudos to any parents out there, because it's such a hard job, because as children, my mom was supposed to be my hero, right? She was supposed to fix all my problems and make everything all better. And she did what she could. The second was really, for me, compassion. It really came from just understanding that everyone heals in their own way. And I couldn't expect, right? I think that so much of where disappointment is rooted in, right, is mismanaged expectations. So again, I had this expectation that my mom would be my hero, but right. And then I was disappointed, and then I got angry, and then I was resentful. And now I did what I needed to do for me to heal. And I'll also share another layer of this, which I think which is a little bit more tender in the heart, which is, my mom isn't that supportive of my disability work. She doesn't understand why I don't just go back to Goldman. She calls it monkey business. She just wants me to get a real job. My brother, who was also in the car accident with me, once told me that I was a fraud because he couldn't understand why people would compensate me to go and talk about disability inclusion and embracing adversity and all of those things. And so those dynamics still exist, but he's doing his own thing. You know, he was also in the car accident, and my mom was also heavily impacted by the car accident too. Like, we're all just trying to do what we need to do for ourselves. So in order for me to move forward, right, and I'll acknowledge this is probably the unfinished part of this story, is I would love, and I'm going to say it out loud because I would like it to manifest, I would love to see collective healing in my family around this car accident. And it hasn't happened yet. I'm the only one who lives. I live in California. And they're all still in Maryland. I'm the only one who lives outside of the state, and I haven't seen them in a year, and that's very heartbreaking for me. But I'm doing what I need to do for me, right? And if this distance is what allows me to have a compassionate heart toward them, then that's what needs to happen right now.
I love it. You just don't understand. I'm so excited. Like this, I remember being on the Real Share with my friend Michelle Patterson, and we were talking about, and I think this is the second time I've talked about this on this live show, but we were talking about love and all these like softer emotions, and you could kind of sense, like, when you go there and you're vulnerable and you've got grace and mercy and hopes and dreams and things that are sometimes in society considered like weaker emotions, people, type A personality people, or like driven people, or people who just don't value those emotions as much, like, are like, okay, get to the nitty gritty, get to the nuts and bolts, get to the steps, like get to the thing that actually creates change. And then we addressed it. I said, no, you don't understand. Like, this is that. Like this is the vehicle where change happens. And so when you study great leaders that created positive change in the world, they carried what you have. And that's a tremendous load to carry. And I applaud you. And I so agree with that end result of that coming together for your family sooner than later. I'd love for them to enjoy this journey with you. So I believe that with you. Talk to the average everyday Joe. And they're like, okay, this is cool. I'm inspired. I'm maybe not in a leadership role at a corporation, but I want to like be sensitive and not perpetuate the problem. What can I do?
I will say two things. One is, whenever we feel judgment, use that as an opportunity for curiosity, or use that as an opportunity for self-reflection. And I'll share an example. So Daryl and you and I we met on Clubhouse, and I recently hit my 1 month mark of being pretty active on the app. And I noticed that I was hosting a room, and a couple people who have usually been cheerleaders and always supported me and come into my rooms didn't, and they were in another room. And I started having this whole narrative of, I don't matter on this app. You know, it's like so high school, just the social dynamics. Like how come they don't like me anymore? What did I do? And there was someone else on the app who said this. I think his name is Jay, and he said he went through something similar recently, and he was like, I actually use that as an opportunity for self-reflection.
Mhm.
Because what is this bringing up from my childhood that is coming out now?
Yeah.
And so that was the first thing, which is we judge. We're literally judging people all the time, right? I think that we can't go around and say that we don't have biases as we move about the world, but we can, I think, start to form new habits around what we do with them, right? Start to ask those questions. And I think that curiosity is the key, is just going to open up so many other things. And oftentimes, so especially in my work, one of the things that I think is happening is that people are realizing that ableism is a thing. So ableism is when we place value and worth on a person based on their body and or mind. That's the definition I'm using.
Okay.
A lot of it is rooted in anti-Blackness, and other systemic forms of oppression. And people are just realizing that it's happening, but we're so conditioned to say certain things. They've become, I think idioms is the right word. Like, I like, for example, if we say like, I hope my words don't fall on deaf ears. And I, in my work, I can't unhear something like that.
Right.
But what that person is really saying is, I hope my words don't fall on ignorant ears, right? So then you're equating deaf equals ignorant, right? So how can we start to unlearn some of that? But instead of, I think this is where calling out and calling in culture really comes into play, to really either pull that person aside and say, hey, I noticed that you used this phrase. I want to better understand what you meant by saying that. And if you meant that deaf equals ignorant and you really meant to say ignorant, then maybe you can use the word ignorant next time. Things like that. So
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest thing. And even with like, this whole racial conversation is, and I'm guessing it's the same, because when, it's always been a problem in terms of systemic racism and oppression and that type of stuff. But the recent events of last year and all the stuff that have been happening these recent years, it's caused the conversation to happen. And I feel like because I'm married to a white woman, I'm like everybody's like safe Black person to come talk to. So when the suggestion to how to create change was like, well, go actually have a real conversation with the Black person, I was like, So people would come to me and they were so scared to say the wrong thing. And I was like, that to me, the fact that you're curious, there's grace for you to say the wrong thing because you truly want to learn. It's different when you're trying to put down by saying something intentionally to be hurtful versus just being like ignorant or unaware. And I that's what that sounds like, because when you think about approaching someone with a disability, that like I don't want to say something that's offensive to them if I want to really truly like be curious about their world. So would you say it's the same way? Like if someone were to approach you and just like, hey, really want to be curious about like how your life is affected because of your disability, that you'd have grace for that?
Yeah, I would say that again is a yes and. So similar to you. So my background's in the corporate world. So I have found that more people may feel more comfort talking to me about disability because I'm also very open about it. But again, like a lot of my network may also still be working in that type of ecosystem and wants to figure out rather like, and I didn't come up in this world like through an activism lens, right? I came in across from a corporate background into advocacy. But I love the way you phrase that question. And the reason why I say yes and is because disability, to me, it's an identity, but it also means and has different definitions depending on who is using it, right? And so disability can be very personal if people view it as a medical thing and may not be in a place that they feel comfortable talking about it. So oftentimes what I tell people is exactly what you said, Daryl, is a perfect script, which is, hey, I'm really curious to learn more about how your disability has impacted your life. Would you be open to a conversation? If the person on the receiving end says no, to not take offense to that, right? Because for 12 years, remember, 1997 until 2009, I would literally cry anytime someone said like, hey, what happened to your arm? And again, they were well-meaning, but I also wasn't in a place to be open about that. And the yes and, so many yes ands. Part of that is that no one owes you, right? Like we don't owe anyone sharing intimate details of how we became disabled or about our disability.
Yeah.
Because again, that's very personal. So
Mhm.
again, it's kind of having that existing relationship there,
Mm.
but also just like gauging like what is this person's comfort level with me asking these questions, right? Because the only way we're going to learn is by asking questions. And one of the things, so part of the reason why this shift happened for me was I noticed that people were making assumptions of what happened to my arm, and they were defining my narrative for me rather than me taking ownership of it. So now so much of what I do is like I put it out because I want to like say how proud I am but before people make assumptions, right?
Mm. I love it. I want to start landing this plane here. I could talk to you for hours. Like you're very transparent and vulnerable and open and down to earth in real time. And so you're my type of people. Um, I'll make this. I'll make this my last question. Then we'll run the commercial for like how people can connect with you and how they can get involved, and that'll be where we end. Here's my last question. This is hard for me because I have 30. How do you discern the difference between pity and compassion?
Wow. That's the $1,000,000 question. So I recently looked up the definition of pity, and I can't remember it now.
If you would have quoted, I was like, she's a genius. She can just quote everything, memorize credit card numbers.
I know. But what I remember was that I often put pity and shame together. And I shared this on TikTok, but oftentimes when I tell people, oftentimes one of the things I've noticed is when I tell people I'm disabled, they'll respond with, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to me assumes that I should feel sorry about what's happened for me. Versus if you came to me and you told me you were a Black man, or I came to you and I told you I was an Asian woman, how would you respond? You'd be like, cool. And it's like, why can't like do you notice the differentiation between an I'm sorry response versus a that's cool? Because and this is where I think it becomes tricky, because I think that the car accident and losing my dad and that grief journey and the healing that needs to happen in my family, that is a like I'm sorry response, perhaps. So to me, the difference between pity and compassion, I would actually compare to the difference between sympathy and empathy. So a sympathetic response. So if we translate obstacles to what all of us are going through now during COVID, like things are just hard. A sympathetic response would be just be positive. Things are going to get better. Like we got this, right? And those are empowering and inspiring and motivating. But if an empathetic response would be like, I'm really sorry that you're going through a hard time right now. I'm here for you if you want to talk. Or, do you want to share a little bit more about what's going on for you? So that to me is, I think, what I'd like to see more of. And one of the things that I'm learning during this pandemic is the power of empathetic listening. Or I guess being compassionate listening.
Yes.
How can we hear people for what they're actually saying? Because I'll share this one other thing. And Daryl, I wasn't sure if you were there, but this happened on Clubhouse. So there's a conversation that was happening about confidence. And I got pulled up onto the stage. And every single time I get pulled onto the stage, my heart goes. but again, I think similar to you, you know that your message transcends you and your nerves. So I get onto the stage and someone started talking about how their confidence really comes from them being limitless. And I became really curious. And I said, hey, I'm really curious about that answer because I feel systemically limited by being a disabled woman of color. How do you think that the system and the policies in place that are actively trying to hold us back are playing into this idea of feeling limitless?
Jeez. Jeez.
Because those are the questions I ask on Clubhouse. But what I wanted to say was someone responded and they said, hey, Tiffany, you're not disabled. You're differently abled. And you need to stop looking at yourself as disabled. To which point I responded that, hey, I said that I was disabled and I have no shame over my disability identity. But by diminishing the fact that I just said what I was, is you assuming that I should feel shame around being disabled, right?
Oh my gosh, this is so good.
And I actually think that didn't really answer your question, but I did.
It's okay. I'm fascinated. I told you I have 30 of them. Like, and I want this to be about you. I'm resisting the urge to talk about mental health because that's my hill that I die on. But it's the same thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
I literally had somebody just say that same thing to me. They were like, because I did this post and I talked about, well, I did 2 posts, 2 videos, content with my wife, and I called it "Married to Depression." And really, it was just a marketing ploy, right? Because like, ooh, like clickbait. But somebody came up to me and they said, "Hey, you're not depression. That's not your identity." And they were like real serious and crying in tears. And I was just like, because they equate it to shamefulness. And I'm like, no, I don't see it that way. They see it as weakness. I actually see it as strength, right? And the way that I always say this is that I say, like, we all love those movies where like Rocky is like taking punches and he doesn't want to get up and he keeps getting back up, and we love the persistence that person has. I view depression, like mental health issues, the same way. When a person is fighting these thoughts and this weight of depression on their life, but yet they keep getting up every day when they don't feel like self-caring or talking to anyone, they just want to isolate or end it, and yet they keep getting up, like that is a tremendous amount of strength. And so like I always get to think like, oh my gosh, you're so vulnerable. Oh my gosh. And I'm like to me, it's I think vulnerability should be the norm, not the exception. Right. And so anyways, I gotta stop because this is not my mental health.
I'm into it. So I didn't mention this, and this may have been part of what you wanted to talk about, but I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2019, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a type of mental illness, which is a type of disability. It all filters down the line. And I went through intensive treatment, and I needed the label to know what I needed, if that makes sense, because I lived for so long thinking that I was fine, right? It had been over 20 years that when I started to have, emotional breakdowns very randomly, I just thought that was what it was. And so now I feel very empowered to say that now I feel like I'm in a period of my post-traumatic growth, as a function of knowing here's what I had, right? It took me, what is that? It took me 22 years to get diagnosed with PTSD, when really, if a 9-year-old girl, like one of the things that I'm still trying to wrap my head around is like, I was also in the car and I saw everything that happened. I mean, I could make up some totally random story because no one else was there. I mean, my siblings were also there, but like, and someone didn't make it out alive and I did, let's like, I'm even 20 plus years later, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. But there are mental health ramifications of seeing and experiencing all of that.
Absolutely.
And the fact that everyone was fixated on my hand and no one thought to be like, hey, Tiffany, how are you? Like, are you okay? Like with what you've experienced? That to me baffles me. But again, I think, and again, but perhaps a conversation for another time, I feel like people, when we have physical disabilities, people are so fixated on that and whatever treatment we need. Because I will say physical therapy is needed, like similar to any other type of exercise, like body equals health, and you want to like keep things up. But at the same time, all of us have mental health. And the fact that people were just like, let's fix your hand, let's fix your arm. And no one was like, hey, like you were 9 when that happened. Like, can we talk about that?
Right. Wow. Okay. We're going to land the plane. Just like forced landing. This is phenomenal. I could literally talk to you for hours. Tiffany, how can our audience and how can we support you?
I loved your question around how can we become more compassionate? And so again, the mission is larger than me, but if you want to support me, you can find me at tiffanyyu.com, and I'm Tiffany Yu across all the social channels. Oh, wow. You even have it as a banner. And if you want to support Diversability, our mission at Diversability is to amplify disabled voices. The website is mydiversibility.com, and you can find us at Diversability across all social channels. We really spend our social channels trying to get out educational content. So our most recent post was about the disability representation at different inaugural events. And I feel like I feel hopeful with the new administration and how disability centered they want to be. But but yeah, I think it's just remembering that disability exists. And I think that when people forget, and again, no one is intentionally trying to cause harm, or I would like to believe that is so, but it makes me feel minimalized,
Small.
makes me feel small. And which reminds me, right? And again, I use that as an opportunity for self-reflection, which reminds me of the way I presented myself as a kid, which is I just wanted to be small, right? It all connects. I mean, it all ties back to some trauma once upon a time. But I think, and again, I guess I'll close with this. I think that the turning point for all of us, and the message I hope your watchers, or your viewers, sorry, like making up new words on the fly.
Watchers, just like people just staring at us like.
That your viewers get from this is that we all have healing to do. And reconciliation and liberation, I think, needs to happen at all levels. And I think one of the things I'm learning is that I come out with a very strong message. So when people ask me, they say, Tiffany, what's your call to action? How can we all be better allies to disabled people? Daryl, I mean, you're modeling exactly, which is amplify disabled voices anywhere you can. If you're in a position to hire disabled people, pay them well. But if we're not even starting with self-reflection of where did my views around disability begin? Why do I feel that people who are disabled should feel shame, right? Why do I feel that the label depression should elicit pity? We need to like realize that everyone's starting points are different. So like I can come and be like, I want to pass all these policies, like sign this petition, show up at this protest, which are all totally fine. But if my starting point is, let me talk to my own family around ableism, around racism, around things that are happening in the world that we need to reconcile, then that's what my starting point's going to be.
Wow. Oh gosh, you're fascinating. So guys, go visit her, go support her cause, check it out. And I love that call to action of take a step. No matter, there's no such thing as a small step, because what is a small step to someone is a huge step for another person. So take a step that you feel like it stretches you, but it's also comfortable and safe. And realize that rejection may happen, right? Like Tiffany mentioned earlier, like that person may not be open to having a conversation. You may try to do a good thing and they not respond the right way. And oftentimes that's evidence of their own pain and in their healing journey. So love it, guys. Man, this has been phenomenal. If you guys can't tell, like I'm like on 10, but I gotta like snap into like host mode and let you guys know that no matter what you've been through, no matter the mistakes you made, always remember that God has a way of awarding us second chances, and second chances exist so we can finish strong. So let's go finish strong this week. All right. Peace.